Hi Dragonflies, welcome back to Dragonfly Spirit Studio. I'm Lynn Bauer. This is the design and planning video for the first project in my online Watercolor Skies and Clouds workshop. One of the most difficult things to learn and to teach in watercolor is the whole process of going from your initial inspiration, whether it's coming around the corner on a path to a beautiful scene or a photograph that brings back memories from a great experience or vacation in the past. How do you get from that to an actual plan for how you're going to do your painting? What are you going to do first? What are the challenges you're going to have to overcome, and how are you going to deal with them? What should you include and what should you leave out? So in this workshop, I'd like to bring you along with me as I do that design process, so that by watching what I'm doing, maybe you'll get some ideas about how to do it for yourself. Now, depending on your personality, you may love this. This is great. I get to, really understand what we're going to do before we start doing it. Or you may be just like, can we please just paint? If you're feeling like, can we please just paint? Then by all means, go do the Project 1 paint along and come back and watch this later if you want to. This isn't absolutely necessary, but I think it's a skill that a lot of people are trying to find a way to learn, and I think that this will help. That said, I want to say, especially for this very first project, some of the design choices that I'm making in this course have to do with skills that I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to teach you how to overcome certain challenges that you'll face painting skies. And so for that reason, sometimes I'm doing things that aren't like the most ideal for the most powerful painting I could come up with. So I'm not trying to suggest that the design process that I'm using here is like, oh, this is just the most awesome way to do things. But I do think you still will get some understanding of how I go along and say, okay, if I'm going to start from this concept for the painting, what challenges will I encounter and how am I going to deal with them as a watercolor painter? And that part alone, even if you don't agree with my aesthetic choices, I think will help you plan your own paintings. For complete course information, including all the videos in this course, the templates, reference photos, handouts, information on supplies and materials, go to my website at www.dragonflyspiritstudio.com and follow the links to learn and then watercolor skies and clouds. Let's begin by looking at the photograph that was the inspiration for this project. I was driving along a country road one morning just before dawn when I happened to catch sight of the crescent moon, and I pulled over and snapped a couple of quick photos. This seems like a very simple sky, perfectly appropriate for a first attempt, and the sort of thing that many of you may have attempted before, possibly minus the crescent moon. This sky actually contains some significant challenges for the watercolor painter. The first challenge that I want to address is simply the fact that we're working from a photograph. Photos simply don't capture the full experience of standing in the scene. I made some adjustments in the photo on the right to show you something a bit more like what I perceived as I was standing in the scene. I used photo editing software to make these changes just so that you could see a little bit of what I was seeing when I stood in the scene. But normally, I just make some written notes for myself about things that the photograph might not have captured. One thing that a single photograph doesn't capture is things that we're aware of that are outside the field of view for that photograph. This photo is a wider angle shot showing the dark blue above, and if you look closely you might be able to see that there were still some stars visible in the sky. I might want to be able to capture a little bit of that and still keep something of the composition of the other photograph. And this is the sort of thing that we can do as painters. We are not bound by exactly the literal truth of a scene. We can make some adjustments to communicate the emotional impact and the feel of the scene, even if what we show is not exactly what a camera would have captured. So I might make some notes to myself that I want to actually have the upper part of my wash be a bit darker so that I can spatter some mask and have some stars in the sky. Ordinarily, I like to play around a lot with the colors in my paintings, but in this project, I'm going to stick fairly close to the color scheme that we have in this photograph, with the exception that we'll go a little darker and a little cooler in the upper half so that we can add our stars. The reason I'm doing this is that this photo has a challenge that is common to many sky photographs, and that is we need to lay a graded wash between complementary colors, so orange and blue or yellow and violet. If we're not careful, this can result in a gray or brown band where they mix. The first thing that can help with this particular challenge is to look carefully at the colors. At least one of them is usually fairly grayed. I've pulled some blocks out to the side so that you can see those colors in isolation and see how gray they really are. And then next to each block, I've shown the pure color that is sort of underlying that gray. The color that our brain is trying to tell us is the color we're seeing. So even if we decide to brighten the colors up a little bit, as in this example, if we're not careful, our tendency is to go, oh, well, blue and an orange. I'll use cobalt blue and cadmium orange. And that's why we might get something like this that looks pretty unnatural, and the grayed area in the middle really jumps out at us by comparison with the pure colors on either side, which are actually too pure for the scene. Another strategy that can help us avoid that appearance of a sort of a gray or brown band in the middle is to mix a transition color between our complements or near complements. If you look at the photo closer to the horizon, you can see there is actually a rainbow order transition of colors as we get closer to the horizon, from blue through turquoise, green, yellow, orange, and then to a red-orange. We don't need to put all those different bands in. Some of them are very, very narrow. But adding in one band of a grayed green or a grayed yellow can help us make the transition in a way that appears natural. Another challenge we'll face in this example that's very common to watercolor skies is that the graded wash involves both a color and a value change at the same time. So one or the other, we might be able to handle the position of the transition pretty easily, but the two together, it's hard to make the color transition and the value transition both happen where you want them to happen. A third challenge that we face with a wash like this is just the fact that it's a very smooth wash over a large area, which is difficult in watercolor. It's probably the most difficult skill to master in watercolor. So if you feel like this is something that you really struggle with, you're in good company. I think all watercolorists struggle with getting a very nice, even wash, especially if it's graduated over a large area. There's another difficulty here, and that is that many of the blues that we like to use in skies, things like cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and ultramarine violet, cobalt turquoise, these are sedimentary colors, and by and large, sedimentary colors can be lifted fairly easily, and they also can settle into the bottom of a container, and so they're more prone to being disturbed as you bring the brush back for another pass on your wash. They're more prone to settling out too soon, and just generally to being somewhat streaky in a wash than the staining colors that have smaller pigment particles. Now, we're not going to let all these challenges stop us from painting a subject like this or other similar skies where we might encounter similar challenges. Instead, we're just going to come up with a strategy that allows us to deal with them, and the strategy that I've come up with I call my goof-proof graded wash. Now, I should not call it goof-proof because I can goof up just about any strategy I come up with, but the guiding principle for me in all my watercolor planning is to try to come up with a way to approach the painting so that when I have brush on paper, I only have to think about one difficulty at a time, maybe two. But I try to minimize the number of things that I have to keep in my head, because in watercolor, the paint and the pigment move according to their own behavior, their own capillary action, gravity, temperature, humidity. I don't get to control that. So I have to be there present to what's going on the page and ready to respond to it. If I'm trying to juggle too many things in my head, something gets away from me. So here's a strategy that I use for washes like this. Basically, we're going to use a process of glazing successive washes. We're going to do one color of wash at a time, and it could be a mixed color. I don't mean one pigment, but we're not going to try to do a graduated wash between blue and orange. We'll lay our blue wash, let it dry, and come back and deal with our orange wash later. Before each wash, we'll pre-wet the paper so that we get the smoothest blend of color possible. And then the sequence of our washes, in most cases, you could deviate from this, but for the most part, it works well to do any yellows first, then reds and oranges, then staining blues, greens, or violets, and then sedimentary blues, greens, or violets. Saving those sedimentary colors to the end means that you don't have to glaze over them and risk disturbing that wash of an easily lifted color. We're going to start a little bit light and not too gray because it's always easy to glaze some more of the same color down to deepen the color, and it's easier to gray a color than to bring back vibrancy that you've lost. We'll use transition colors between complements, and if we have a narrow band, we'll tip the paper sideways when we're adding color and let it run sideways off the page instead of down the page. All of this is designed to have us tackle only one difficulty at a time. Now, if your head is spinning after all that and you're thinking, I will never remember all that, don't panic, because first of all, you can download that handout off our handouts and templates page for the Watercolor Skies and Clouds course on the website. But also, after you've done the Project 1 paint along, I think you'll understand it in a functional way, and you'll see why you do all of the steps the way we do them. And I don't think it'll really be all that hard to remember. But there will be a handout just in case you need a cheat sheet. Now let's turn our attention to the arrangement of picture elements. I might prefer to have the crescent moon on the left so that the horns of the moon open into the painting, leading the viewer's eye in, and move the cell phone tower to the right to balance the composition. The cell phone tower does work as a picture element to balance out the moon and give us some interest on the horizon, but I'd rather it be something more fun, like a sailboat. Now, of course, there's no sailboat in this scene, and I don't happen to have a similar scene that does have a sailboat, but that doesn't matter because in a backlit situation like this, the foreground items are mostly silhouettes. I can use this photo to capture the shape of the sailboat, and then just do a little rearranging and resizing to come up with a design for a painting that I like much better than my original photo. This template is available for you to download from my website for this project, but I hope that now you can see all sorts of possibilities for using photos of your own to design paintings similar to this. So now we have a composition that we're happy with, and we've identified some of the challenges that we'll face in this painting this sky, and we have a strategy, our goof-proof graded wash, that we're going to use for addressing some of those challenges. So now we're ready to go off and do the Project 1 paint along. I just want to include one comment here, and that is if you don't like masking fluid, or you just want to simplify things a little bit and not have to think about it, the moon and the stars are actually completely optional in this project as far as learning the skills that you'll be using in the rest of the course. So feel free to leave those out or add them later with an opaque white, and you'll still get all of what you need to learn out of the Project 1 paint along to take you forward to the rest of the Skies workshop. See you in the paint along.